The pattern I'm going to tie today is called a sandy mite, and it's a very traditional pattern from Montana. It originated in Missoula, Montana, with a barber and wig maker by the name of Franz Pott. And he came up with the idea of weaving the horsehair and weaving the elk mane into a hackle. And so I'm going to show you the process. It's rather involved and it's tedious to do, but this is the way they were traditionally done. And there's a couple other things that are not quite as traditional, which I will get into here. So the first thing we're going to do is weave the hair hackle. What I'm going to weave it of is elk mane. And this is elk mane here, which I have processed from the elk hide. Comb it out, you stack it, you even all of them, and then you put them into bundles. And from the bundles, what you do is you take off 5 of the strands, you trim them at the bottom, and then you dip the ends in glue, and then you set them on a board in order to dry. And so you do this for, you fill the whole board with them. What you will use when you weave the hackle for a size 8 sandy mite is 16 bunches of 5 fibers. So I will show you how the weaving process is done with the elk mane. So what I'm going to take is I weave on 6/0 thread. You don't want to go anything smaller than 6/0 because it will likely break. You want to go with something, you definitely don't want to go with something larger either because you don't want too much bulk on the head. So 6/0 works great. This is 6/0 Gouda broad, but 6/0 unithread works just fine. So what I do is I take 2 feet of the thread, and then I'm going to double it over and knot it. So you just take the thread, double it over, and then what I'm going to want to do is measure off 7 inches. As you can see, there's a loop here, and I measure off 7 inches, and at that point I take it and I tie a double overhand knot. It's essentially a surgeon's knot if you're talking a fishing knot. And I find that's much easier to do if you use a crochet hook to pull it through. So that's what I'm using here. So there's the one overhand knot, and then you take it down, measure it 2 inches, and you do another double overhand knot at 2 inches. So there you have, okay, the 2 knots are right here on the thread. And what you do is I use what I call a weaving post. This tool is available from Todd Collins, who's a plumber in Butte, Montana. Todd makes these, and Todd is an excellent weaver of hackles and flies. He has tied the traditional George Grant flies for years. And Todd can provide the weaving posts for you on those. Now what you do is you put it over, I have a pin already in here. It's just a plastic head pin. And you want a little bit of tension on the line, but not too much or you're going to break it. And so you have to be careful when you're doing that. I'm not going to weave a whole hackle. What I'm going to do is just weave a few strands to give you some idea of how it's done. What I like to do is use a little bit of dubbing wax on it, just so that it glides down the thread nicely. Now here's one of the bunches that I have glued previously for the hackle weaving. So this is 5 strands of the elk mane, which I showed you there. Now what you do, this is another tool, and this is an essential that Todd Collins makes. This is a set of small hackle pliers on which he has silver soldered a piece of copper. And so there's different marks on here for the different size hackles that you're going to be weaving. And so what you do is you take the fibers and you take them to the length that you want them to be, down to the mark that you want them to be. And then you hold it. Now this is the weaving process for the hair hackle. You drop it down through. You switch hands. You have to take it in your thumb and your middle finger because you're going to need your index finger. You come around. You cinch that up. You make sure that this stays tight up against the thread. You pinch it with your thumb and middle finger. You push the fibers down through the thread. You open up the thread. You put it down through. Then you come around and you half hitch it. Now the half hitching at first will take a little bit of time. You have to learn that. What I've found is if I can push it through and I can put it against my thumbnail on my left hand, then I can grab it and I can tighten it down. So that's the first one right there. You do this 16 times. I'll do a couple more to give you some idea of how it's done. One way that this deviates from the original pattern is that the hackle is woven in the style that George Grant came up with. Franz Pott, who originally did these, wove these onto 3 strands of thread. George Grant took apart Pott's flies trying to figure out how he wove the hackle and could never figure it out. And George used to take apart the flies and rebuild them because this was during the Depression, and they were using these flies literally to survive. And so he would repair the ones that he had, but he could never figure out the woven hair hackle. So what George Grant did was came up with his own method, which ended up being an actually much better method because it has very little buildup here and you get a much trimmer hackle. And so this weave that I'm doing is the Grant weave. And so I'm going to do a couple more, and what you do is you just take this, you put it down to the mark, to the length that you want the hackle. You split the thread here with your fingers. You drop it down in. You grab it with your thumb and middle finger. You come around. You make sure that that's up tight. When you first do it, there's a tendency for the hackle pliers to drop. So you've got to keep them pinched and then you keep them tight. You don't want that to happen, or else you won't get an even hackle. Push it down with your index finger. You come around. Then you tighten it down. That's where the wax comes in real handy on the thread. Thread's pre-waxed, but it helps a lot putting a little bit more on it. I'll do one more just to give you, an idea of how that's done. So it's very simple. Okay. Again, you just come down. You move them down to the length that you want the hackle. So you drop it in. You pinch it to hold it. Come around. Keep it tight. Drop it through. And you cinch it up. So there's 3 of them. I would do 13 more. Okay, I'll do one more. You move the fibers down to the mark on the gauge where you want them to be, so your length is always consistent. And like I said, this tool is available also from Todd Collins. Since he is a plumber, he's very good at silver soldering. I've had this one for 7 years, and it still is working beautifully. Other people have tried epoxying them and different methods. The silver solder appears to be the only way that really works. So you just come around, divide the thread, and you half hitch it. So as you can see, they're all even, and that's how the hackle comes out. I'm not going to finish up and do the remainder of them here. What I normally do is if I'm tying some of these flies, I will do up a large number of them at one time. And as I've always said, that's what football season is made for. You can sit there and watch football because anything that's really important is on replay, and it's a good time to weave hackles. So this is what the hackles look like when they're on a board, and then I stretch them out. So these are all elk mane, just woven, and these are the ones of 16 fibers each, 16 bunches of 5 each. So I'm going to use one of these on the fly. Now I'm going to go ahead and remove this because we're not going to need that, and I'm going to get the weaving post out of the way. And I will weave the body for the fly. Now the hook that I use for this is a Daiki 1710, and I think they were originally tied on Mustad 3906Bs, and this is about the same size. It's a little bit longer, which seems to work out just perfectly for the sandy mite. So we'll get the hook in the vise. Now again, I'm using 6/0 thread. This happens to be 6/0 unit thread. And what I'm going to do is just start it about a fourth of the way back and just work my way toward the back. Now one thing that I do on these, and it's something George Grant did on all of his flies, except for the dry flies of course, but on his nymphs and his woven flies, he used to come to the back, and before he would start, he would put a little thread knob in the back to push everything up against, and it just keeps everything together. And what I'll do is come back and finish that off just like I do the head of the fly a little bit later. So I'm going to put that knob in right now, and as you can see what that is, it just builds it up a little bit. And then you come forward and I will tie in the 2 materials for doing the weave. And they will, be bunched up against that here. Okay, the first thing I'm going to tie in is horse mane. Now this is the mane of the horse. You do not want to use the tail. The tail is too coarse for this. The horse mane is a much better material. And what I've done is cut off some of the fibers, from the mane, and I just take a bunch of them here, and I can't really tell you how many exactly to use. That just comes with practice. You just know I'm taking a bunch. You don't want too many. You don't want too few. So I'm going to use a bunch about that size. I mean, it's not precise, but you'll get a feel for it. And you want to make sure that if you have any short fibers in here, you want to get them out. Although you can fix it if you tie the fly. It's not that big of a problem to repair, but you want the fibers short. Now one little step that I do when I tie in the horse mane is I like to take a pair of thinning shears. It's a barber's thinning shears. This is a small pair of them here. These, and as you can see, the ends of them are grossly serrated. And so what they do is they thin the fibers. So I just trim those off, and I'm trying to keep as much bulk as possible away from the head, because you're going to have enough going on up there when you tie the fly anyway. And so what I do is I put this on the far side, and you'll understand in a minute why it matters which goes where. For doing this sandy mite, we're going to have the stripe on the bottom. Now I have the horse hair tied in, the horse mane tied in, and I'm going to come back up and I'm going to use just your standard embroidery floss. And it's just standard orange embroidery floss that you can get at any material store, anywhere that sells crafts or anything like that. They come with 6 strands, and I use 3 of the strands. So I separate those out, and I've already done that here. So I've got 3 strands of the orange floss. And what I'm going to do is tie that on the near side. Now this is known as the Pott weave. This is the one that Franz Pott came up with. And what I'm going to do, you can't weave with a thread in the way, so I just go ahead and whip finish this right here to tie the thread off. I usually tie with the scissors on my hand, but with this fly, there's so many things you have to do where you really can't have the scissors on your hand. Okay, now the reason I said it goes on this side, whenever you weave, if you want the stripe on the bottom, The orange has to be over there. Since I'm going to put the stripe on the bottom, the fly is inverted in the vise. If you don't have a rotary vise, all you have to do is just take it out and turn it over. But if you're going to weave this fly, you need to make sure that the orange is on the far side and the horse mane is on this side. Now, before we go any farther, I just wanted to talk to you real quickly. The original ones of these flies were tied with ox ear hair, which is about that long. It's very difficult to weave with that. They used to do actually the hackle and the bodies with that. And that's a difficult material to find nowadays. But that was what the original was done with. But then they learned pretty quickly that horse mane comes in a lot of different colors and is much easier to work with because it's a lot longer. So anyway, I take the horse mane, and one thing that I always do is I like to wax it a little bit, because you put a lot of tension on this fly. And so you want to make sure that you can grip it really well. And I like to do that, and then with what's the remainder of the wax on my hand, I just take it and put it on the horse mane fibers. Now, this is the pot weave. I love the wax because wax is something, it's sticky and it holds things in, but it also lubricates and it slides. So it's a great thing to have, and it works really well with this fly. Okay, here's the weave. You take the orange and you come behind the horse mane, and you take the horse mane and you come up. Now, your first wrap is around the horse mane, but not around the hook shank. So you go around the horse mane, you come down now around the hook shank. You have to switch hands, so you catch it between your middle and your index finger, and you pull that back. You're keeping tension the whole time. You take the horse mane and you wrap it around, and what you're doing is covering the orange on the top of the hook with that. So what you'll have is the horse mane on the top and the orange stripe on the underside. So that's the first wrap. Now the rest are just a repetition of those moves. You come around the horse mane, then you come around the hook, you switch hands, then you take the horse mane around that, you come up, and notice how I'm bending that around my finger. That helps a lot to keep the tension. I like to call this is kind of an in-your-face fly, in the sense that you have to be in close on this or you're not going to get the tension. If you're trying to tie this from way back here with your fingers, you're not going to get the tension and you're not going to get a straight stripe. So you really got to put some tension on this and just keep doing the weave. Again, it's around with the orange stripe, around the horse mane, take it back, come around, then you switch fingers again. When I bring the orange embroidery thread down, I catch it between my little finger and my next finger up there. Forget the name of that one. But anyway, that's the way that you do it. And when you get to the front here, you have to make a little bit of room. And then there's a question of how do you finish it off? Well, that's the trick. You come around again, but instead of coming back around the horse mane, you put this in the material clip on your vise. Now, you take the horse mane and you've got to put a lot of tension on it here. And I like to bring this under with my thumb, and that holds it real tightly. As you can see, you've really got to get it in your vise too. I can still finish it off this way, but it slipped in the vise. Now what I did was I restarted the thread with the bobbin. You got to get several good tight wraps on that. And then you want to keep the tension on the bobbin, or with the bobbin, I should say. And then that's tight now. And you just take your scissors and you clip the thread, and then you clip those hairs down as close as you can get them. the horse mane. So I'm going to go ahead and fix it in the vise now here. And I'm going to re-invert it. Now what you have to do is when you've come around, you have to, as you can see the stripe on the underside now. You can see how that stripe is orange. The top of it is the brown horse mane. The underside is the stripe. I've been told that they originally did this to keep the horse mane from coming unraveled. They found out that actually by doing that you could change the colors and really make the fly much more effective. And the term mite is for the sandy mite. They used to refer to stoneflies as helgramites. And so the mite pattern was originally, I think, tied as a stonefly. And that's why they called it a mite, was because that was the nickname for a helgramite, which they called stoneflies, which it actually, a helgramite is not a stonefly, but that's what they called it. So then, as I did, I pulled that over, that piece that I brought back from here, I pulled that over to finish off the stripe at the same angle. So now you can see the weave and you can see how it comes out. So what I'm going to do now is just, cinch that up, tie it off, and I'm going to whip finish it again because I'm going to go to the back and do that step that I talked about a little bit earlier, and I'm going to finish off that rear of the fly. So again, this is the step that George Grant always did. And you just, as he said, you just take all the care with that you would with the head of the fly. And it keeps everything together, and it makes the fly look a lot more finished. So a large whip finisher is very helpful for this. Now when you're doing these, don't do too many wraps. When it looks good, stop it. Because my good friend Todd Collins, who I've talked about here, has a saying, and it is absolutely true in fly tying. And that saying is that one step beyond perfection is disaster. And he's absolutely right. Because if you go too far on that, it'll all slide back down on you. Not the hair, but I'm saying all of the threads. So just do what's necessary, and that's all you really need to do. Now, I actually had this in my pocket, but I'm going to take the end of this and I'm going to finish this off, like I said, just like the head of the fly. I like to use Loctite super glue, and the reason that I like that is because it comes with a brush in it. And what you do is you dip the brush in acetone. So you can clean it out and then you trim it way down. And you can see this one's down to about 4 or 5 fibers. You can trim it down actually to 1 fiber if you want to. And it makes a great head cement. It's very glossy, and once you put it on there, it's not coming untied. I mean, you could put loose wraps of thread there, and they would not come untied once you have that super glued on. So there we have that finished. Now, the woven hackle that I talked about, as I showed you, I had those already prepared. So I'm going to go ahead now. Normally I let that dry a little bit, but I think that'll be fine. I think I can avoid it and we'll be fine. So what you do is you restart the thread. You just come back a little ways there, trim it off. Now if you recall, when I wove the hackle, we had the long end here, the 7-inch end, and then I had the end with the 2 knots. So I want the hackle to swoop back over the fly. And so the end that I want to tie in is the long end. So I don't obviously want to work with that much thread, so I just trim it off. And I have this hackle now that I'm going to tie in, and this is the long end that I trimmed off. So you take the hackle, you put it in. Now what I like to do is double it over and tie it down again, because to try to retie that, if for some reason this pulls out, to try to retie that hackle in with that little short piece is very difficult to do, and you really don't want to waste all that work you put into weaving that hair hackle. So it's just a good idea to tie that in and double it over, and then you're fine. Okay, now to wrap the hackle, very simple. On some of the other patterns in this series, like the Lady Mite and all, they are done with badger hackle, not a woven badger hair hackle, not the badger hackle that you actually, would tie a dry fly with. I'm talking not the rooster, but I'm talking about the elk mane, and then the badger hackle are what we use for the hackles. So anyway, this is the elk mane, and what you do is you come around, you keep it going toward the back, and you bring it out right against the horsehair. You come around and you can see how that beautifully flares out there. And I'm just going over the thread with it. And then the hackle is tied on. Now, there's going to be people that are going to say, well, can't you just take the horse mane and splay it out and trim it off? The answer to that is yes, you can. In fact, that's the way most people tie them now. When you get done with the horse mane, you just take it and you try to put it around the whole fly, you pull it back and you just tie it down and you trim it off the length that you want. I'm too much of a traditionalist to do that. This is paying homage to George Grant. George would have never done that. In fact, when asked one day why he didn't just wrap a hackle on these flies, his answer was, because that's not the way it's done. And I agree with him 100%. This is the traditional way with the woven hair hackle, and actually they do have advantages. Aside from being a better looking fly, I just think that having the natural pointed ends on makes it a much more attractive fly. So you just finish the head off, and then you whip finish it. And that's a traditional sandy mite. This is still a very effective pattern. I think probably the only reason that they aren't still as popular as they were was because they're hard to find. Not that many people tie them anymore. And it used to be, that was a pattern most people used in the West, and I would have to say there are very few patterns that have caught more fish in the western U.S. than the sandy mite. So again, I just need a little bit of the super glue, put that on the head, and then we're done. So there you have it, a sandy mite with a woven hair elk mane hackle, and that's the sandy mite.